we're going to just do divide the mechanics and kinetics, just so we have an idea of these, of how they are going to mean to us and how we're going to use those variables. Okay, so let's go through the running. So basically, the running, it's a gauge, but a little bit faster. So the running stride is basically the time that you have between the period between the first contact on your left foot and until you contact the floor again with your left foot. So when we talk about the running stride, we are considering 2 steps, one with each leg, until we start the cycle again. So we have a lot of cycles of stride during our running. Okay, and for that, it's interesting to see one thing first, that is the stride length against the frequency. So when we're running at a low speed, we tend to keep a short stride, lower stride, smaller stride, and with a smaller frequency of steps as well. So we run slowly. And when we start going through a mid-speed and accelerating a little bit, our body tends to start by increasing the length before and not the frequency. We don't keep short steps, but with more frequency. We tend to open the length of our steps and our stride, but with still lower frequency. And when we want to run a little bit faster, we tend to get the frequency a little bit higher. So normally that is the pattern that we have for the running. We start with a bigger length, and then at the end we put a higher frequency on that, so we are able to run faster. Okay, so let's go back to the kinetics and kinematics. So the kinematics is exactly what happens. So we see what is happening and everything that we can see that's going on. For example, the markers that I said yesterday, the movements that we are able to observe. But it's when we talk about the kinetics, it's really the reasons and the forces that are behind that and the reasons why we do what we do. So let's talk a little bit about the roles of the leg. The roles of the leg are basically energy generation when we are talking about the phase that we leave the ground, and the energy absorption when we are on the ground, and of course support as obviously as it is. But yeah, so basically energy generation and energy absorption are the 2 main characteristics of the running. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but there are basically 2 ways of running, 2 methods of running. And when we talk about our landing, which is rear foot and forefoot, can anybody tell me the difference between the video that we're seeing on the left side and on the right side?
I think it could be something like the way the foot touches the ground, I think.
Absolutely. Perfect. So on the left side situation, we are seeing the landing. If we see closely, the landing goes first on the rear foot, so on the posterior part of the foot, and then it goes to the front. And in the second situation, they start the running with the forefoot. So as you see, it's not, I think with zooming we can see a little bit better, but let me try. So here, the first contact is on the rear foot and then the forefoot. And in the situation on that side, firstly goes the forefoot and then they put the rear foot on the floor. Okay. So yeah, that's basically the main difference. And when we see that, okay, what does it matter, right? If we are talking about 2 small differences, that is not usually simple to see. If you just see a person running, it's not that simple to see this difference. But there are a lot of effects on the body according to the way that you run and the way that you land on your run, well, when you're running. Okay. So, all right. So basically, the running kinetics is the study of forces that we're going to do. So we're considering the weight, the air resistance, and mainly the ground reaction force. That's the one that we're going to give focus on that again, as we did yesterday, but now with a little bit more focus on the running. Okay, and also there are the internal forces, which we're going to talk a lot today. that everything that pushes and pulls within the body and control the motions that we are doing. Okay, so if we take a look at these graphs, let me try to zoom in again. So this is a rear foot running. Okay, when we start by landing on the rear foot, what happens is, I don't know if everybody that's here today was here yesterday, but today we were talking about volleyball landing and how the landing is different for every athlete, and how the the basically the most common way of landing, and the one that works for everybody, that we land while we're jumping from volleyball, we land first with the toes and then with the heel, and that's why we have two ground reaction force curves. Curiously, while we're running, it's quite the opposite. If we're running and we land on the rear foot, what happens is we have the first peak of contact on the rear foot, and then when we put the whole foot on the ground, there's another peak of ground reaction force. This is again is vertical ground reaction force. Okay, only considering the vertical part. So vertical ground reaction force, we do the first peak corresponds to the contact of the heel, and the second peak corresponds to the contact of it all. And curiously, when we are running forefoot, there's only one peak of force, because it's not like it's a landing from a jump, for an example, that you really put your toes before, but putting on your forefoot, that means the anterior part of your foot, and that the doesn't always mean that you're going to have, again, two peaks of ground reaction force. So normally that is the drawing of ground reaction forces for these two types of running. Okay, so that doesn't tell us much about the difference between the rear foot and forefoot. But wait, we are getting there. And it's really more different than you think. Okay, so let's talk a little bit of the bone anatomy and about the impact absorption of our body, the forms that our body has to absorb energy. Okay, so there are basically three forms: by eccentric muscle activity forces, which are the ways that we want to use by controlling joint flexion and using the muscles to be able to control the motion in a way that we can absorb energy and use the energy through the muscles. That's why we have muscles. So that's how we want to use them. And bone microfracture as internal structure is formed. Microfractures, as you know, our bones, they have some our spongy bones on the extremities. They have already some space for any kind of shock or any kind of I don't know the word in English to use to that, but any kind of contact, a harder contact that we do have, that it's using those spongy bones is part of the process that make our bone grow, not grow, but get stronger and prevent diseases such as osteoporosis and things like that. So we want to use also the bones to be able to do the microfracture and get a bone stronger. And that's also a good way for us to to do the impact absorption. But also there's a problem that we use also the cartilage deformation, and that's how we don't want to use. We don't want deformate the cartilage, because so far today we don't have anything that is as good as a natural cartilage for humans. And once it's done, it's done. You cannot get more. So you want to keep the cartilage well as best as you can, and use the other two forms of impact absorption. Okay, so let's take a look at this a little bit carefully now. These two differences of running. Okay, so the can you see the yellow point here on the ankle? That's an important thing to take a look at. Can you see the yellow point here? Hopefully you do. So when you're landing, if we're landing rear foot, what happens? Our contact point, initial contact point on the ground, it's on the heel, which is behind the ankle point, which is behind the articulation point. What does that mean? If you imagine, I don't know this word in English, but anyway, if you put the pressure on the other side, if you put the pressure here, and your point articulation is on the right side, the tendency, a natural tendency of our body is to do this. So whenever you put a pressure here, it's natural the tendency to do this. If you stand up, for an example, with your only with your heels on, your body will want to put your toes down and contact the ground with your forefoot. In the same way that if you're going forefoot, and then if you're landing this way and your articulation is here, the natural movement would be for your heels to be down in this way. So here is the applied force, the ground reaction force, and how it normally points out, and the same way here. So whenever you have a rear foot landing, our natural tendency, as it's shown on the yellow arrow, is for our foot to go down like this, to do a plantar flexion. That's normally what we expect. If we're stopping the movement here, we naturally need to do a plantar flexion. The same way that if we're landing on the forefoot, if you're landing on your toes, your natural movement would be to go down here and put your heels on. So that would be probably to do a dorsiflexion. Okay, so your natural movement changes completely. As you see, the way that, for an example, if you're landing barefoot, your body tends to do this. We don't want this movement to be done so quickly. So what do? We put some effort in order to control the motion in a way that it's not going to be down really quick. So the some of our we put some of our energy in order to control the motion, not to go down so fast. The same way if you're running forefoot. So if you're here and you don't want to get with your heels down really quick, so you put some muscle activity here in order to control this movement and not go down so fast. So if we see whenever we're running rear foot or forefoot, the difference between these two muscle recruitment is really, really big. I'm going to show on the next one. So running rear foot, you land here. You don't want to land. You don't want to contact your toes so fast. So you need a force on that way, the way that is drawn here. So we need a force in the opposite direction in order to control the motion and be able to land softly. The same way with your forefoot. So if you're landing with your toes or your forefoot, you will have a tendency to go down with your heels, and you need a force on the opposite way in order to control the motion and not go down so fast. So if you see these two people are running, and you sometimes can even tell how they're running, but the muscle activity is way too different on these two people. Okay, so that's something that really makes a lot of difference. So once on this side, we are talking about, sorry, once on this side, we are talking more about the tibial anterior and all the other muscles that act on that purpose. On the other side, we are focusing more the activity on the soleus and gastrocnemius. So, talking about the joint work, I am getting some. This is part of a study, okay, that I saw about running biomechanics. This is not my study. I'm just presenting to you, but it was also calculated joint torque, but the torque basically is the rotational force acting on a joint generated by the muscles and other tissues. Okay, so analogically, it's kind of the second Newton law, but applied to angular and circular activities. So it would be the torque is the moment of inertia times the angular acceleration, the same way that force is mass times the acceleration. Okay, so the unit that we're using is Newton meter by kilogram. So just so we don't get just so we don't get lost in the middle of it. So we already know that depending on the way that you run, you have different muscle activity and different muscle recruitments, different muscles recruitments. And besides that, we do have different articulations recruitment. So if we take a look at the knee moment, Moment and torque are really just really similar terms. There are small differences, but they're really, really similar. Um, but if we take a look here at the knee, let me try to zoom in a little bit more. So, just so you know, the rear foot is the gray one and the forefoot is the black one. So, the rear foot is the gray one and the black is the forefoot. So, as you can see here, the extensor moment of the knee is way bigger when we're talking rear foot, way bigger when we're talking rear foot than it is with the forefoot. And at the same way, the ankle moment is really the opposite. The plantar flexion moment of your ankle is way bigger in situations with forefoot than it is on rear foot. So, what this study also told us is the difference between generation lows for the two types of running. Okay, so here I don't want you to consider so much the imposed because they took runners that are used to do the rear foot or use the forefoot, and they also impose them to run in different ways. But talking about the habitual way of running, this first line refers to generation of energy. So we saw that considering these three articulations, ankle, knee, and hip, you can see a small difference here. The ankle is responsible for 67% of the generation of energy when we're running rear foot. And if we're running forefoot, this goes to 73.1. And it takes a lot of the knees that had, for an example, almost 20%, and it goes to 30.6%. Okay, so this is about generation of energy. But when I'm talking about absorption with the down here, as you can see, the difference is even bigger. While the ankle and the knee were basically being used in a way that it was similar for both of them, it was 45.2% or 41.1%. When it comes to the forefoot running, the ankle is responsible for 62% of the absorption of energy, while the knee drops to 25.7%. So what that really tells us that there are differences between rear foot and forefoot, not only on the muscle activity on the legs, which we saw the difference between gastrocnemius and soleus recruitment or tibial anterior recruitment, but also it gives us a lot of difference on the torques and that moments that we can observe considering the knee and the ankle, and consequently a big difference between the rear foot and forefoot when it comes especially for the generation of energy as well, but especially for the energy absorption when we use how we use the structures of our body and our lower limb to absorb energy from the ankle and from the knee on these different kinds of running. And it's something that you don't really see while somebody's running. You don't really go checking the way that they run or but that's really, really important. Some people, unfortunately, are more focused on the type of the foot and the drawing of the foot and the way that the foot is, because everybody has a different shape of the foot. But that's not as important as it is to watch the type of step that this person has and the way that it's going to interfere on the muscle recruitment. Okay, so as I told you before, this would be really quicker today than it was yesterday. I had less variables to show you, but that's basically what I have for you today. I hope I was able to contribute to something today as well, and thank you very much.
Chicos, ¿podemos dar aplausos por favor al ponente? Muchos aplausos. Perfecto, muchísimas gracias. No sé si alguien tenga alguna duda. Do anyone have questions? No? I think in the chat. Well, I do have one. Is how should training protocols be adjusted for an athlete to the transitioning from rear foot to fair foot striking?
Well, yes. So I'm okay, but I worked with some, so I know some of them. What is really, it's not as simple as it is to change the type of running. for a person. It's not like they're going to be able to change so quickly. So it's not, it's still not defined if there's a best way of running, if it's better to run forefoot or rear foot. Okay, that's not exactly a consensus yet, but once it is, people are definitely going to start changing the running style. But it's not that simple to change. But absolutely, there's difference because, as I said, if you're running rear foot, there's more chance that you need to get, for an example, a little bit more attention to your tibial anterior and all the structure that is responsible for the anterior part of your foot to be in order to prevent your knees from getting injured, because also you're using more of your knees than you would use if you're running forefoot. So there are many ways that we are able to get these muscles stronger and prevent from injuries, for an example, on the ankle, and basically if you're running rear foot on the knee. But yeah, if we're switching from one to the other, you will have to change a little bit of your plan because, as I said, there are different recruitments. If you're running forefoot, you're using more of their sole using gastrocnemius. But still, you need a full preparation. It doesn't matter how you're gonna run. It's not like you can ignore the rest of your muscles. You still have to work with all of them. But yes, there are some changes that can be done. But again, I'm not a running athlete specialist, so I can't tell exactly what you need to hear. But I can definitely search that for you and get back to you if you want.
Oh, okay, thank you so much. So, should coaches actively try to change an athlete's central foot strike pattern? Or, for example, how does footwear influence ground reaction force expression during running?
Can you restate the second question again?
Yeah, how does footwear influences ground reaction forces expression during running?
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Like,
so let me go back here. I'm gonna share my screen again.
okay.
All right. So I don't think we should. I mean, again, I can't say for certain if we should change the way that an athlete runs because normally they run like this since they were born. So they are used to that kind of running, and sometimes it's not that damaging. But of course, if we see a player that is running some way and that would be damaging to him, I would definitely probably indicate the change of running style for that athlete. But if there is not a problem and is still not defined, if one way of running is better than the other, I wouldn't really lose a lot of time with that. I would just wait until there's something really on that's already published that says, okay, this kind of running is best for you. Then this way, I would be able to change the way that we are training. And regarding the ground reaction forces, this is basically how we see the difference. If we're running rear foot, normally the first contact's a little bit stronger. So we see there's a difference on the rear foot. Again, as I said yesterday, on the landing for volleyball, we land firstly on the toes and then on the heels. That's why we have two peaks of ground reaction force. The same way that here, if we're running rear foot, you put your heels first and then your toes, you have also two peaks of ground reaction force. That's how we can see the ground reaction force acting this way. With this information, it just goes to show that we do have differences, but it doesn't show exactly if this is prejudicial for the athlete or not. But while we're running forefoot, it's a little bit smoother. As you can see, there's normally just one curve, which means the movement is a little bit more continuous. It's not very separate in two.
Okay, thank you. I think Raymond Brañez has a question.
Okay?
Yeah, he's. Mm, Raymond?
Oh yes. I have a question. Is
Yes.
For example, I heard you are a specialist in volleyball. I think so. So when a libero reacts suddenly to a fast ball and performs like a quick launch or a dive, maybe, what are
Mhm.
the main biomedical risks or biomechanical risks for the knee or the ankle injuries, and how can they be minimized? You know.
Okay. So of course, there's always the risk of injury in terms of hitting the knee on the ground. That's obvious. But besides this one, um, what we usually see in volleyball, it's unfortunately is a reality that people are only concerned with your ankles and your knees when you're a jumper, when you're an attacker, mainly a middle blocker, an opposite, or an outside hitter. Because if you're jumping to attack, normally they take more care of the needs for these kinds of players. Let me just close this. Okay. So they normally tend to give more attention to the jumper players, which I think it's a complete problem because as we researched before when I was in Turkey, we were taking a look at the amount of jumps that the players do, and the setter, for an example, is a player that really jumps way more than the other players. If you take only a look at the amount of jumps, they jump way more than the other players because they jump on every setting action. Um, so their jump is they have more jumps, even though it's not a jump for attack, which is a different um, intensity of jump, but still they're jumping. And also the regarding the libero that you said, it's really important to know that the defense process is really stressful for the knee, the defense, because whenever you're waiting for a ball on the defense and you just put your foot hard on the ground, you're going to get attention there. So some people like to say, okay, my knees hurt today, so I'm not going to jump today. I'm just going to defend. Okay, but you're going to get stress on your knees as well. I have never studied exactly the consequences of the defense for a knee, and nobody normally studies that. They prefer to study the jump because it's a little bit easier to see the results. But I definitely think it's important to do a complete, really good program for injury prevention on the barrels as well. Okay, so whenever I talk to my physical and conditioning coaches, I like to let them know that even though they're probably focusing on running, on speed, on reaction, which is really good, but I need the knees of the liberos also to be really taken care of because that's something that can be stressful. The defense can be stressful for the knee and for the ankle. So I would advise a full physical preparation in terms of injury prevention for these players as well.
Yes, I think that may be improved by plyometric on the big muscles that holds the tendons of the knee. That's what I think because right now I have a sister who is a libero, so she's always dealing with some injuries on their knee, and I tell her to rest all the day, and yeah, that's how we manage the
Mhm.
the injuries.
Absolutely. I wouldn't be sure about the plyometric exercises because, as I said, even though it's really stressful for their knees, they don't jump as much. So, but in depending on how you do it, it's important to be able to uh, get these muscles really, really strong in a way that it's not going to be risky to do some action if they have to jump or even not feel pain, even if they're just defending, because most of the liberals were already attackers before. So they attacked a lot and their knees, because nobody's born a libero, it's really hard. Normally you were an outside hitter and then you became libero. So you jumped already before and then you stopped taking care of your knee because, oh, okay, I'm not jumping anymore, so I don't need to take care of my knee. And that's quite the opposite.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for both yesterday and today's sessions. The content was extremely valuable and insight, especially the detailed explanation of biomechanics and movement patterns. I truly appreciate the clarity and depth you brought to both days. And I think we both, we all are looking forward to applying this concept in our biomedicals work. Thank you again for sharing your time and knowledge with us. Thank
Thank you very
you.
much. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.